everybody. Welcome to today's 4x4 Virtual Salon, where we're going to be discussing AI in the post-ChatGPT era. And so if you're new to the 4x4 format, the reason it's called a 4x4 Virtual Salon is because we attempt all within 1 hour to cover 4 topics. We have 4 speakers. We're going to take at least 4 audience questions, and we're also going to cover 4 polls as well. So it's intended to be a very interactive format. So please, you'll see at the bottom of your screen that you have the option to submit questions, and then we'll open up the polls in a short while, and you can take part in those polls. So so let me next introduce our speakers. So first of all, so probably it looks different on your screens, but in my top right here we have Mark Barton, who is the CTO of Jade, which is an AI company based in London providing intelligent customer experience automation for some of the world's largest banks and fund administrators. Next, we have Mike. So Mike is not on video at the moment, but he may come on video shortly. He's currently on a train on his way to Oxford because he's suffered some delays. So Mike is managing partner at Harvest Innovation. He's also an advisor to several companies, including Unio Wealth, which is a disruptive wealth manager in Ireland. He's the author of the book called The Leveling, which talks about the end of globalization, and he was formerly the CEO of Credit Suisse. Next, we have Tiphaine Saltini, who's CEO of Neuroprofiler, which applies behavioral science and AI to use cases within the financial services industry, including risk scoring, financial education, and recommending suitable products. And last but definitely not least, we have Dragos Novac, who is a serial entrepreneur, and he's founder of Nordic, which provides data about investors and startups in Europe. He also publishes a much recommended newsletter on the European VC sector called Sunday CT. And like me, he's based in Switzerland, as it happens. Right, so I'm going to move on to the first of our 4 topics here. And Mike, I hope you're not going under a tunnel or anything, or go through a tunnel, because the first question's for you. So when ChatGPT came out, the release of ChatGPT a few months ago, it really felt like one of those moments, like like the release of the iPhone or something, when everybody stood up and took note, and as being something really momentous. So my question to you is, how do you think that it's going to transform businesses and in industries?
Hi, Ben, and apologies for the tech failure. There was no AI involved, just simple old-fashioned trains. I'm a little bit skeptical about all this because AI has existed for some time. Certainly, as an industry, it's been accelerating for the last 3 or 4 years. What's new is the public discovery of AI and the financial market mania around that. If you look at stocks like Micron, for example, it has a negative gross margin, but the stock is powering ahead because they are associated with this AI craze. So we're already losing perspective. I'm not convinced that AI is something that is going to destroy humanity, as some people have said. I think the area I'm really focused on is some of the infrastructure around AI, the legal, philosophical, economic and investment structure. And I think, like all new technologies, that will grow and adapt. I do, however, think that AI will change industrial structure. And we've had an enormous and significant change to industrial structure brought about by globalization. We're now in a post-globalized age. We've had digitization, which has largely resulted from COVID. And I think AI is the next, let's just say, significant factor maybe for the next 5 or 10 years that will revolutionize how companies do R&D, how they design products, how they deliver them. And I think it will make data and good data sets even more valuable.
Thank you very much, Mike. And as much of what it's like taking this on a busy train. So thanks. We can hear you very clearly. Dragos, question for you. So Mike thinks that we're kind of losing a bit of perspective on this. I guess both when it comes to fearing the worst and also, I suppose, hoping for the best here. Would you agree? Do you think that maybe this is already being a bit overhyped, or do you also see this as 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 a really game-changing moment?
Hello. Yes, definitely. I think it's a lot of hype and a lot of unexpected let's say expectations, because the hype is both on the consumer side and on the business side, and as well on the investor side. But the business cases are very different than all these expectations. And to my surprise, actually, the public discourse actually ended up on the negative side of it, on the negative implications, on the threats. And my perspective is that we should look at this tool as something like a leverage for the future, at a way of augmenting things. It's an innovation that we need to kind of plug and play into each part of the society, or each in terms of an organization, each part of the value chain, or each part of the business model. I wouldn't be that worried about the bad influence or the bad ways the technology can be used. I mean, technology is just a tool. AI is just a tool. It's just software. So it's not about it being bad for the society. It's about being used in a bad way by people, which has been the same even before the hype. So definitely it's a hype. And it's about us putting it either with a positive spin or with a negative spin.
Fantastic. Does anybody disagree? Just before I ask the next sort of prepared question, does anybody disagree? Does anybody think that we do have the right sense of perspective about the magnitude of change?
I think, well, I would say I don't see the doom side of it, but I think it's transformational. It's like the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, so it's like as significant a change as the invention of electricity in your view, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Right. So Tiphaine, Dragos said that this technology needs to be, I think you said, plugged and played into sort of different value chains, into society at large. When you think, because you are focused on financial services, when you think about financial services, what kind of use cases do you think are best for plugging and playing this kind of generative AI and AI more generally?
Well, I think it's very large, and especially in two areas where we have a lot of data, and second, where we have.
But doesn't that, sorry to interrupt, but doesn't everybody have a lot of data now? Isn't that the point, that this is kind of these are internet scale trained models, right?
Yeah, sure. But for instance, to create new model, we don't new financial model. We don't necessarily have a lot of data. So it's like I don't know, like fraud detection or trading. So in specific areas, we have a lot of data. So it's even easier. And second, in areas where we have documented rules. So typically in compliance, in IT, when you have to write financial IT codes. So in this area, it's huge. So I have in mind, we mentioned it, like fraud detection, compliance, law, IT coding, and I have in mind two examples. So, for instance, in our case, to build the content of our financial education platform, we use ChatGPT, and it helps a lot, especially for basic concepts like shares, bonds, where of course we have a lot of data and content online. So of course we have to work on it, but it helps us to save a lot of time. And I have another example, for instance, in the trading area, fintech called Composer, for instance, and they are using GPT to write trading codes automatically. So yeah, I'm completely aligned with what Mark mentioned. It's huge, and it's as big as the Industrial Revolution.
Fantastic. And Mark, coming to you. So you're using this also every day with your clients in financial services, and what sorts of benefits do you think, like particularly sort of quantifiable benefits? Where, you know, where are people using this? Again, maybe which use cases, but also what's the kind of measurable impact that they're starting to see?
Yeah, so I mean, we're focused on one very particular, somewhat unsexy problem, maybe, which is processing human communications. So, you know, there are virtually every financial and actually beyond finance. There are huge teams of people dealing with emails, typically coming from other organizations, asking them to typically fix something that's gone wrong, or to you know, perform some action that is not available to do in a simple front end or something. So, you know, we've got a number of clients. We're doing very, very similar things, different parts of the industry, but effectively we are solving the problem that today, what do? Somebody is sitting there receiving an email, they look at it, they try and figure out what it's about, and then they send it to the appropriate person to resolve it. And what we're doing is using various types of AI, from the most simple, which I would really say are just statistical models, through to the more complex, you know, generative AI, to help us unpick more complicated requests and work out that there are many things going on in this, and routing them in the first instance to people to deal with. We're just taking away the administrative and the triage part of the job, but ultimately we can then start to automate or assist. I think this idea of augmenting human is actually where the sweet spot of a lot of things are. So you just take away the annoying part of the job so that people can focus on the more interesting part of the job. So if I take one client, which we're going to look at what measurably, how did it impact them? So they had a team of about 25 people dealing with requests, and they were so busy that the reality of their day was that they were, you know, desperately trying to, you know, look after the clients, and what they were supposed to be doing was updating a case management system to keep track of what's going on. They need to do that from a compliance perspective, but also from a, you know, management information perspective, and they couldn't keep up. So from about 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock every day, they would sit there and try to update the system with what they've been doing for the day. Extraordinarily horrible thing to have to do. So we put a system in which basically did that triage and automation of the update, nothing to fix the problem itself, just the admin. And that saved about 50% of the effort. So they went home at 6 o'clock. I mean, this is actually during COVID, so they stayed at home and stopped working at 6 o'clock rather than having, they could start, you know, so that was a real you know, productivity gain, which is the kind of obvious thing you would expect. But then what you find, of course, is that they also found that on the day of going live, the number of requests went up by 20%. Well, it didn't really. Those were the 20% they'd forgotten about. So they either did it, but never tracked it, or they forgot about it. So probably another email came along saying, hey, where is that resolution? So immediately you don't miss things. So the client experience goes up. Now, I can't give you a nice, happy metric on that because NPVs are not really captured in this kind of business. But what we could say is that the increased sort of morale, engagement of the team meant that they actually did see a reduction in the attrition of that team, because
Sure.
Nobody enjoys doing this hideous admin task. They prefer doing the, you know, the complicated part of their
Probably
job.
also easier to recruit as well if you could advertise the job with 50% less admin, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have, you know, and we have other clients where we've actually automated tasks where the turnaround of something used to be minutes because it involves somebody reading it, taking action and responding, where we've completely automated it. And, you know, I mean, there's a sort of almost spurious number. It's like 95%, you know, reduction in the amount of time it takes. It ends up being sub-second. So there are many, I mean, these are obvious things, you know, productivity gain, removal of risk and, you know, poor service, and then actually you make people's jobs better. I think that kind of are the main things. And having all of that above it, which is perhaps more important, is you can actually see what's going on as a manager. Because if you're tracking the actual communications, then you know what's happening. You're not relying on somebody to tell you that something has changed. So I think those are the metrics I would call out at the moment that we're seeing.
Fantastic. So what you've done is you've set us up extremely well for our first poll, as well as for the next section. So if we could open up the poll, right, here we go. So the first poll asks, you know, where are we likely to see the biggest benefits around automation, risk, and so on. Many things that actually Mark referred to. So I'm going to vote.
Quite accidentally.
Was it accidental? Great. Okay, good. So I actually can't see the results, so I'll come back to that in a second when the results are in. But in the interest of time, by the way, do not be shy. So if you do ask a question, I would definitely ask it to our panelists here. But in order to get through all the topics, we're going to move on to the next section. I think Mark set us up extremely well for this, right? Because the next section is really about the threat to employment and the risk of us being completely displaced by software. And so Mark planted this idea, which I quite like, about the augmented humans. So so Dragos, I'm going to come to you first. Would you subscribe to the idea that we're going to be augmented by this, or do you think we're going to be displaced by AI? And which roles and types of jobs do you think are most at risk of being automated away?
I honestly don't think we're going to be replaced.
That's good. That's good. I think everybody's going to breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Although if it's a job with no admin whatsoever, that would be great. It sounds like the sort of height of the Roman Empire, right? So.
No, but I mean, again, technology. It matters how you use it. I believe in using it for improving things, for augmenting jobs. I don't think we're gonna. It's very hard to envision a 100% job that only relies on software. There's always going to be a human, at least supervising it. Not even if it's not involved in the whole process. At least there should be, or there will be, a human involved in supervising what the software does. So I honestly don't believe in that. And for me, it's just like I think Mark said it very well. It's just a transformation history. Think about, I don't know, how the cars replace the carts, right? It still, the driver remain in there, right?
Yeah,
the driver of the car remained the driver of the cars, even though the car was a transformational change to the car. So yeah, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I don't think we're going to be replaced.
Good. Okay. I think it's a good place. It's a good framing, I think, so I'm going to come to Mike next. So by the way, I forgot to say this at the start. So Mike also publishes a weekly newsletter, which I would also strongly recommend. And Mike's written a lot about this. So Mike, would you also agree that we're going to be enhanced, not replaced by AI? And then do you think that we'll see sort of a big net reduction in employment as we automate away administrative aspects of our jobs? Or do you think kind of like we'll create new employment as a result too?
I think I've got a few good examples, Ben. You remember, you're probably old enough to remember a British TV series called One Man and His Dog, where a shepherd uses a dog to, herd sheep. And for a long time, man has been using animals to enhance what he or she does. It's just the same with technology. There's a great book by a friend of mine called Afric Campbell. It's called The Lovemakers. And it's a book about the sort of romantic interaction of AI and robots and humans. And there's a couple of very good essays at the back, and they talk about how people in different fields, soldiers, drone operators, for example, become attached to the robots and the AI programs that they use. So I think that the best uses of AI will probably be educated people who use AI to cross-check and improve what they do. I think the biggest displacement of AI will probably be in emerging economies. And we're all habitually focused on Europe and the States and maybe China, and not the other 70% of the world. And I think labor markets, particularly those that are service-oriented in what's now called the global south, could potentially suffer from this. And you may see actually a big halt in productivity of actual labor forces, not overall productivity, but of labor forces. The other thing to bear in mind is where do the rents from this productivity go to? And I think there's a worrying element here that if you look in the States, the AI pillars, if you like, are already owned by a small number of people and small number of companies. And that's the same for venture capital as it is the quoted companies. So you have these very tightly held and controlled pools of AI expertise, in many cases linked to governments. And it's very hard for other people, other shareholders, or elements of the labor market to access the productivity from this. So this is going to be a really big issue in the future. Where do the gains from productivity that are driven by AI go? So I think we're going to see, we will certainly see more and more people talk about the issue of AI inequality, both in terms of capital access to AI and then within labor markets.
And we probably don't have enough time for you to answer this, but do you have a policy remedy for that challenge of, more and more profits going to fewer and fewer people?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, and I think the easy way to do it is tax. The difficulty, I think, is that the big AI players are now so powerful that becomes problematic. You may even have a tax on AI engineers, for example, that you then distribute that to the rest of the labor force.
Great, thank you. Right. Okay. So we've had a couple of questions now from the audience, which is good. The audience is warming up here, right? So the first one, which I'm going to put to everybody, but so anybody can jump in and answer this. How can AI contribute to addressing societal problems such as climate change or income inequality? Disregarding what Mike said about it's going to make income inequality worse in an ethical and responsible manner. So I don't know if anybody wants to jump on that.
Well, if I can
please
answer for me, they can it can help. So, for instance, if I take the example of climate change, we can have like an analysis of available data on climate change thanks to the artificial intelligence programs. I'm not sure they will find the solution, but at least they will help us to focus on solutions and on creating solution and finding solution rather than on an analysis and to analyze the situation. So for me, again, it helps, but it doesn't solve the situation.
Yeah, it would help us to sort of diagnose it better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Dragos, sorry.
I mean, looking at the other side, it may be a way of at scale doing the opposite of misinformation, which is trying to use generative AI to inform people at scale, which would be otherwise difficult. I doubt that will happen, but it would be a nice thought that it could.
Dragos, I think you were going to say something there as well.
Yeah, the way I look at it, I mean, AI is just a word that came up in the past 6 months. But for example, I have a friend of mine who's actually also in Switzerland, in Zurich, and he's been using AI for like at least a few years, and he's been using satellite data to collect the climate-related data about crops, and on top of that, build an insurance product, which he sells to South America, to Africa, to all those low-income countries, to farmers who cannot afford and who don't have access to technology, and they actually don't have access to good financial products to hedge against the climate-related effects for the crops. So it's so many startups that are using technology for both climate change and income inequality, which happen to use AI. It's just a mean to an end. AI is just a tool. I wouldn't be so keen on the fact how AI can, solve the world hunger or whatever. It's not going to solve it. It's just like people are going to use it for specific business cases, and particularly in my work, I always focus on the business case. I always focus on the business model rather than the theory that, okay, how can we, I don't know. I'm a very practical guy. My background is in building startups, and I'm always focused on how can we use specifically a thing, which it happens to be called AI today, so we can fix specific problems.
Fantastic. We've had another question. This is quite a long one, right? So I'm going to read this as quickly as I can, right? So AI, as currently available, is clearly a suite of information management and communication tools. Some will learn to use them and become more productive. Some will not and become less useful. there will thus be an impact on employment, unemployment, even if overall the impact will be positive for productivity and deflation. When does the panel expect to start seeing this impact employment statistics in any material way? So, so first of all, do you agree with the premise of the question? And then when do you think this will start to come through in employment data? It feels like one for Mike, maybe if he's in a position to answer it.
Yeah, just taking an extra 2 seconds to think. So it's a good question. I think it'll take some time, and there's a lot of elements need to be worked into this. So we're probably on the cusp, if we see interest rates stay high for longer, of some form of recession. That the issue then is, do companies use AI or digitization to cut labor and try and replace labor? And then what that comes back as when you get the next rebound, to what extent different countries begin to adapt. So I think in terms of the stats, I think we will see probably growing differences between countries as opposed to in headline labor market statistics. The kind of things I'm looking for, and the question is good because Sequoia, which is the giant VC firm, have just released a really interesting website that looks at the effectively the sort of the tech or the programmer labor market in Europe. So they tell you how many engineers are in Zurich or Dublin or London, etc. I mean, software engineers and programmers, and that's probably a good place to go to. And I think also within education systems, if I just gauge what younger people are telling me about how university courses are evolving, that's probably another good place to watch for some of these trends beginning to take hold. But I think when you get these really big changes, it takes a long time, maybe 5 or 10 years, for them to be really imprinted on unemployment stats. I think in the meantime, the kind of things you can look for are, where is the stock market and the VC community beginning to allocate capital, and what areas do they see as being driven by AI? I think healthcare is one where, because we talk a lot about productivity, we haven't mentioned longevity. And I think actually one of the things AI can do in a meaningful way is help longevity, just keep people living better for longer by better diagnosis, and also by prescribing better kinds of treatment. And that itself will have another effect on the labor market, means that there's more people around either to work or to be entertained or as retirees.
Great. I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question in this section, and we're going to move on to risks and challenges. So, Tiphaine, this one for you, which is when you think about, so we've talked a lot about how this will impact employment positively and negatively. When you think about using this within your own company and the companies you work with and so on, what do you advise employees to be thinking about when they're looking at these kinds of tools and how to best use them for their own sort of self-improvement, if we call it that?
Yeah, well, for me, for all employees and for all entrepreneurs, the challenge will be to be able to reskill to tasks with more added value, which is a challenge, but which is also quite positive because we'll have less boring tasks. But it is also a challenge because it's something new, it's a change. And these tasks for me will be more creative tasks and more social tasks, because it's more complicated for artificial intelligence to, again, create completely new products, to have new idea, to reorganize your company, or to have management tips. It doesn't work so well for the moment. So this is where we will all have to focus. And again, for some employees, it will be great because it's more interesting. For others, it will be new. So yeah, it means to learn more and to change perhaps a bit to reskill and be able to adapt.
So the poll, I don't know if you guys can see that, because the poll is telling us, I don't know why, because as as panelists, we don't seem to be able to see the results, but I've got the results, and the majority, so 53% of people are believe that this is kind of going to be net positive, so they're optimistic about the impact, but still 20% believe that this is, although they're more worried about this than they are positive about this. So yeah, and I don't know if I've not seen other sort of statistics, so that's representative, but yeah, still a lot of people are worried about this, which brings us into our next section, which is on the risks and challenges of AI adoption. So Dragos, I'll come to you first. So when we think about adopting this as a business, what kind of challenges do you see companies having when they try to implement this within their business? So AI in general, and I think also these foundation models.
Well, I think first of all, they have to make sure that they really need to implement AI, and it's just not a hyped word that, just because everybody is saying we should do that, they should do that.
A bit like blockchain, where people would just...
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, do you really need it? I mean, that's the first question. If so, what's the business case for it? How much does it cost, and how can I see it? How can I see its impact on the income statement, right? How can I save money, or how can I make more money with it? So unless you figure out that there is a specific business case, that associated with a specific need that should translate in a specific clear use case, that should lead to an implementation strategy, that should lead to some sort of accountability on the income statement, I don't think you should do it. I don't think you should just do your business following hype, just because in the past 6 months, we're talking about AI and how it's going to solve the world's problems. I think you need to be very pragmatic with your organization and to be focused on your KPIs and see how AI or technology per se is going to impact your business.
Okay, having said that, assume it passes the hurdle of being a real opportunity to use AI to generate business value and so on. And do you have tips on sort of getting ready? Is it important to sort of think about data quality and things like that? What are some of the sort of first preparatory steps that any company should take? And by the way, you don't have to answer that exclusively. I mean, Mark, Mark, Tiphaine, anybody else can.
It really depends, doesn't it? I mean, I think it really depends on the use case you need. First and foremost, AI involves data. And most of the times it's a lot of unstructured data. That data, then the question is, can we translate it into something that we can put it to work? Can we clean it up so that we can put it to work, so we can interpret it, so that we can make use of it in a specific way? So it really depends on the specific cases. I think Mark has explained us a very, very good business case, whereas he took it from the problem and how he implemented it. And do you have the data? If you don't have the data, then it's going to be a problem to do AI. Do you have like repetitive tasks? Do you have people who are doing routinely the same task all over again? Those are some of the questions that you should ask yourself. And basically, this is just a lever to implement digitalization or technology in your whole organizational process.
So thank you very much. So we've had a couple of questions in, and as you can imagine, they're looking at the possibility for the use of these kinds of AI technologies by bad actors, right? So the first one, and again, anybody can comment on this, but the first one is, how can the issue of AI generated misinformation and deepfakes be addressed? And what responsibilities do AI startups and users have in combating this problem? So I guess the analogy here would be like, when social media came out, they had no responsibility for dealing with any misinformation. Should we learn from that and kind of introduce different kinds of norms and rules?
If I can start, Ben, interesting development recently. We've had the EU AI Act, which is one of the first attempts to regulate and put sort of parameters around the use of AI, and that basically delineates 4 types of AI activity, from sort of harmless to very harmful, i.e. social control. And one of the strongest areas of, or strongest voices of opposition has come from the VC, and actually in particular the French AI community, because they say that this will sort of crimp their creative ability as engineers and programmers. So there's already a tension between entrepreneurs and regulators. If we imagine some of the experiments that have been driven by AI, I mean, the Swiss government in some of their scientific laboratories have experimented with AI in labs, and it's produced all sorts of horrible things like VX gas. So left alone, it can be quite deadly. And I think we'll see 2 or 3 things. One is a formal coding of AI with inverted commas with morals, so it has a sort of moral overlay as programmed by humans. At the opposite end, you may see kind of ethical or much less ethical uses of AI, either behind the scenes or in countries who just fail and refuse to sign up to what become international standards. And I think for me, the big difficulty in this post-globalized world is that in globalization, it was easier to have international standards. And now we have China, the US, and Europe doing things in a slightly different way. So I think we will struggle to have an internationally accepted high level of regulation of AI. And that may lead to some very nasty outcomes, either in social media or even in the military domain.
So Mike, it sounds like you're in a place where you don't have any too much background noise, right? So there's a second question that's come in here, specifically for you, right? So Mike, you mentioned it's yet to be seen who profits from AI. Do you see this perpetuating shareholder value or generating societal gains? If the latter, wouldn't that lead us into the conversation of universal minimum income? I knew universal minimum income was going to come up, basic income. So Mike, question is, how do you see the as you put it, the rents from AI being split between societal gains and shareholder value?
I don't, to be absolutely blunt. I mean, I think there's a huge misnomer, by the way, about universal social income, because it only really works or has worked in countries that are like Finland, that are very well developed, where you've got solid, transparent social welfare systems, ironically, where you have a lot of data on people and which are high trust societies. So I think that's a bit of a misnomer when we apply that across the board. I think the idea of trying to tax AI and AI companies is something that we will see more of. And that I think will ultimately come down to a battle between the big US tech giants and the US government, which is where the lion's share of the investment is. Very interesting development in China is that, we have the impression in the West that we're powering ahead with AI, more money is being invested in it. But actually at the margin in China, they are shutting off some of the applications and the data sets related to AI because of some of the social implications that this could impute. So in China, they likely won't tax AI, but they're going to try and control it. I think for fear that AI could inspire and enliven some of the Chinese people to maybe to think that there's a different approach to the Chinese Communist Party. So I think my point is that there will be efforts to rein in the economic and social side effects of AI differently in different regions.
Fantastic, thanks so much. Mark, coming to you. So I'm going to put this question to you. It's about biases within data. So in fact, I want to put 2 questions to you, because Mike talked about including a moral overlay into AI, and I want to ask you practically, as a practitioner, how easy would that be to do? And then secondly, I want to ask you this sort of general question that's come up here about the bias in data, because the question, basically the premise of the question is, we only get unbiased outcomes if the data is unbiased, and obviously the data we use is quite often has inherent biases. So how do we overcome those, particularly in financial services, where the financial services providers have a duty of care to consumers and so on? So 2 questions: moral overlay and dealing with bias in data.
Yeah, I mean, the moral overlay one is a very difficult one, because we can't even figure out what a set of morals should be for humans to follow. We have laws some of them are somewhat universal, others are not. But so to actually try to teach our AIs what are the appropriate moral values is such a a difficult subject. I don't even know where to begin with it. So and I think in what we are doing and our experience of what we're doing with AI, the moral overtones don't really exist, because we are not sort of, if we were doing something like, where does a simple one exist? Well, we actually had a discussion with one of actually our chairman, who thought it would be an interesting idea to let GPT tell him which of a set of CVs best matched a job description, which it did. Now, the question is, if it just saves him some time trawling through those, that's great. But, my point was, yeah, but like, how do you interpret what came out of that? The only way to even have that be reasonable would be to have all the CVs of all your employees, all of the evaluations, outcomes, also see how they correlate with what things. And then you need to basically make sure that within that data, you don't have those biases. Like, if you're going back far enough, you're definitely going to have, a very poor representation of certain parts of society for whatever reason, without getting into the details. You need to make sure those things don't come out, and they do come out. And so it's a minefield when you start using it for those purposes. And that's why I personally would steer well away from those, and particularly use it as a tool that helps you get data, but then you have to put the human overlay if there's any moral question going on in there. It's a bit like these drone pilots. Somebody fundamentally decides, am I going to press the button that bombs that building? Now, if that has a chain of command up to, I don't know, whoever is in charge, there's at least a human being that made a decision to kill a load of civilians. If that was just an AI doing that, I think pretty quickly people would get very, very upset. And I think companies would just find themselves fall foul of so much hate that it would be, a ridiculous thing to do that. We already found, I'm not wishing to name the company, but a company that used AI to evaluate how much credit they were going to give. And unfortunately, the wife of one of the partners of such firm got a lower credit rating than the husband because of gender bias in that. Now, that was catastrophically embarrassing, but a very easy thing to slip in there if you don't have some checks and balances. So you have to really focus on making sure that if you've got anything that you're doing that could have any of the various biases in there, you better make sure you've got some control in there to do it. Otherwise, you're going to have a very bad accident in the public domain.
Mike, were you going to say something?
I'm not sure I agree with any of that, actually, because societies are very complex, and we all know largely through learning and education what morality is, what laws are, and they are in most cases codified. And I think if you look at some of the top philosophy and law schools, the really hot area is how to make AI ethical. I'm in Oxford for a couple of things, but hoping to see the person who runs, there's a new institute called the Institute for Ethics in AI. And that's just an example of many groups who have been set up to try and put boundaries on not so much how humans use AI, but how AI itself can evolve in a more moral way. Another, I think, very, very good example I give you is an American lady called Joy Buolamwini. I hope I've got her name right. But I think back in 2017, she set up something called the Algorithmic Justice League, which was to try and correct an inherent bias in the way algorithms for social use were programmed, and also the underlying data sets, so that they didn't reproduce and even increase some of the racial biases we have in our society. So there's the point I'll make is that there's a lot of people doing work in this area, and it is simply up to companies in the industry to pay attention to it and use it in a constructive and moral way.
I'm not quite sure how that disagrees, but the way I look at it is, human beings can't decide whether it's okay to abort a child. Human beings can't decide whether euthanasia is okay. So how there might be some moral things that are agreed, but there's that encoding that legal framework into an application is actually harder. And there may be lots of people trying to do various things which will have positive outcomes, no doubt, but I'm just saying it's still a difficult area.
If
Mike
I
wanted
can
to.
just
Yeah,
say
please.
one little thing is just like, in my mind, there is consumer business and there is business, the B2B and the B2C, right? I think the huge implications of AI is on the consumer side. On the business side, it's just, I think capitalism will work its way, and people will kind of control what they need and what they don't need in terms of data and how they handle this data. And I think Mark explained it very well, how you can have biased or not in screening a selection of candidates for hiring. But on the consumer side, I think this is where the manipulation will arise, and this is where I think, and actually getting back to the following question of David, it's like, this is where actually there should be some sort of a control of what is synthetic data or what is tech generated data and human generated data. And this is where the bias, actually, I think the potential for bias arises.
So could you, so anyway, we're going to move into our full section here. And this is, I wanted to tee this up by saying that in the last poll, and you guys should all be able to see the poll now. I think because we closed them, you should be able to see the results. But in the last poll, or the one just completed, the third one, it says, you know, what areas should businesses be focusing on? And there isn't any sort of clear consensus, but the answer that got the most has the highest percentages is internal systems technical complexities, which I think starts to address the question we've had here, right? As we move into the last section here, which is on the future of AI, which is, I'll read the question out. So this is a question, does AI create more risk and technical debt since there is no human coded logic to debug, and B, more spam because content is too easy to create? So I understand the second part of that question, but the first part you may need to help us to decode a bit. So Dragos, you seem to be on a roll. Do you want to take that firstly, that, you know, does AI create more risk and technical debt since there is no human coded logic to debug?
It can. It certainly can. But again, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? It's what you put is what you get. It's like, and the way you control what you put, which data is dumb, right? And then the way you clean it out, and to the end, the way you use it, in the filters you put in order to manipulate that data, this can create or not some debt and risk. If I know for a fact that if a tech solution is very well thought out, that can work out and that can be scalable. But you can always alter its business logic and always alter its purpose, and this can create that debt. But other than that, I'm not sure what David was referring to. And for the second part, yeah, I mean, this, in my opinion, is going to be a huge problem. It's already been a problem before ChatGPT, because there was lots of SEO-based content farm websites that gamed Google's results and search engines result, and this kind of led to making Google unusable. And right now it's going to be even more so, 100 times more, or even 1,000 times more, because everybody's going to use it. Content right now is going to be marginally zero to produce.
Okay, Tiphaine, I'm going to come to you next. So, like, when you use ChatGPT, one of the things that's really striking is the extent to which it's like human-like. It feels sort of sentient, right? And my question to you is, what's the sorts of things that these sort of generative AI models can do that we couldn't do before? And then what do you see as kind of emerging use cases for this technology?
Well, again, if you come back to our previous point, that's all areas where first we have data, a lot of data, and second, where we have documented rules. So healthcare, we mentioned it before. I think it's huge. because here you have first a lot of data, and you have a lot of books and contents about different types of disease.
Do you think what will be different is that now AI is capable of explaining to the patient in a healthcare type scenario, which it couldn't before, right? Because the chatbots were just not good enough, right? So
yeah,
okay.
yeah. At least for like traditional disease, and then of course for like a specific disease it will be different. But for instance, I saw that the INSERM in France, in partnership with the University of Geneva, they created a conversational agent to help people just question the agent, and for most disease it works. So it means that only when you have something very serious or something very untypical, you can contact your doctor, but otherwise you can have the answer directly. So it's very cheap. It's nothing. No, they have created a mobile application for that, so it can change a lot the healthcare domain. So that's the first. I think it's for me. This will be where we will have a huge impact internationally. And then, yeah, we can think about other areas like the academic research. So most of my friends working in the academic area today, they use ChatGPT to write their paper directly.
So first draft, right?
Yeah, just draft.
Yeah.
So they have the idea. So that's a big creative part. But basically, it helps them to save like days, even weeks, thanks to ChatGPT. So that's another example. And then law, education, supply chain, manufacturing. So yeah, it's quite large.
Fantastic, Mark. I'm going to come to you because as we know, when you work with ChatGPT, it gives you an answer with the full conviction that it's right, but quite often it's not right. So the question too is how, when you're using this in a sensitive environment, like so Tiphaine was talking about healthcare. This is not the sort of environment in which you want to give people wrong answers, right? And that's the same is true in financial services. So what do we need to do? What do we need to add on top of these kind of models to make sure that they're giving consistent, accurate answers?
Yeah, and it's a good question. So I think I think so those models them are fundamentally have the inbuilt problem that they can create unexpected and incorrect answers, and like you say, you ask ChatGPT something silly, it will often give you a completely confident answer. Now, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to actually work out without somebody, what should we say, editing the output, which is exactly what's going on, by the way. Everybody around the world playing around with ChatGPT are effectively helping to try to edit the results. Now, what you can do, I think, is to, what the question is, what tools do you have to protect yourself against it going off and creating something crazy? So, you have business logic, you have certain things, whether these are a very specific example, you have particular attributes that are being are in the context of the discussion. You have various types of things that the company is able to do, is not able to do, and so you can have some pretty straightforward, well, let's call them, because AI is unfortunately a very broad term. Let's say you have some very straightforward machine learning algorithms that will create a reasonableness check and will create inferences of what is sensible and is not sensible given the data that it is. I mean, the healthcare one is a very sensitive one, but you could, for example, imagine that you have some fundamental things which understand, the probabilities and the logic around, symptoms and disease or whatever. And there are certain ones, because of the impact of having cancer, for example, is so high, you're going to skew your care against making sure that if it's any possibility, it's that you escalate it human, right? You don't. But if it's like I've got a snivel and a bit of a headache, it's probably a cold. Those things are maybe less so. But what if it's meningitis? I have no idea. I'm not a medic, so I don't know what the things are. But I think you have to be careful about the confidence levels and what you do, and have a set of what we would call we have a concept of consensus AI. So you use the large language models to do the complicated understanding of the structure of language, but then you have basic things that are being extracted that you pass through simpler models to give you inferences of what's likely and less likely. And you use that consensus, much like you ask experts and multiple different people, to try and give you a set of opinions. Now, it's not a perfect science, but so I think the main thing is if the outcome has any very bad impact, make sure that those things are escalated to humans and take away just the more mundane of those things where you know that the risk is manageable, which is slightly skirting the answer, but I think that's how you have to operate.
Great. We've had another question here, which I think I regret may be our last question. So, and this is a question for all 4 panelists, right? So maybe we'll start with you, Dragos, because you're in my top left here. So are the panelists in favor of more new AI regulation now? So are you in favor of introducing regulation now? Or do you think it's a good idea to rely on current rules and wait to see how things develop first? So Dragos, are you in favor of new regulation to govern the advancements in AI?
My categorical answer is no.
Oh, interesting. Categorical answer. Interesting.
Yeah. In order for you to regulate something, you need to have some historical records. You know, you need to have some patterns that you can deduct. This is bad or this is good. You cannot be reactionary and regulate something that you have no idea how it's going to happen, because you don't really have historical data to show you, okay, this is good or this is bad. You're just reactive to something that may happen.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's good to regulate this kind of thing. And I have a very, very small anecdote. Mark was spot on what he said. A very good friend of mine from Sweden, he's an ER doctor. So basically he's the doctor that goes with the ambulances for the 911, for 112 calls or whatever, right? And he was desperate because people, by the time they would call the ambulance and he got into their homes, they would Google.
Oh, yeah, never Google, yeah.
And they would find all sorts of information that they would use. And it wasn't always the right advice that they would find on the search engines, right? And he was desperate. How the hell do I do so that those guys don't get for granted what they found on the internet? So regulating AI is like regulating, I don't know, the internet. First of all, I think you need to establish common patterns that can show you enough evidence that there is something to regulate. Otherwise, you would get to the other side and you would just prevent innovation, because what EU is doing is just like trying very, very reactively close down the innovation. So everybody is going to move out from Europe, because here is just like you cannot develop something that, you know, you're not allowed to nurture or to explore further, because right now we are in exploration phase. This is not an established domain so that you can come and say, this is what you should do. This is something very exploratory. Every day you read about use cases. Every day you read about new great, smart ideas that software people come up with. And you just want to kind of prevent that by regulating it. I don't think it's smart.
Anybody disagree? Mike, do you want to defend?
I do
the
disagree.
EU
And in general, as a good European, I'm in favor of more regulation. But I'll say two more nuanced things. I think it is practically easy to program AI in a way that, to use the medical analogy, it does no harm, and people are already doing that in many cases. So that in my view is essential. The other thing I think that's going to become quite important and touches on the previous question is the almost labeling of AI-driven output and the verifiability of where, let's say, research papers come from, because we will enter a world where for different reasons, be it pricing, authenticity, etc. And we're actually seeing some case law in the US about this. We need to know what materials, again, to the last example, it could be a research paper, that are produced by ChatGPT or not. And I do think we'll have this world where, you know, in the same way we have foods labeled with kind of, you know, a bio label, we'll have research labeled with, you know, produced by human hands only, or produced by a man, woman, and his or her robot, or produced entirely by robots. And then we just have to decide, you know, how much credibility we give that and what price we give that. And it'll be interesting to see how people begin to price AI-driven research, for example, and will it have a lower price as a sort of commodity than human-produced research?
Fascinating. So, alas, we have run out of time because I thought this would be the case, which is such a big topic and it's such a such an interesting topic. That
if I just very quickly.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, because this question is interesting. For me, regulation is something. Education is even more important. So to educate people about what we told before, the fact that basically it's a powerful tool, but what you get as an answer is not the truth. You have to challenge it, and that's even more important for me than the regulation.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's a really good way of finishing this up, I think, because I think that the consensus I drew from this is that we probably shouldn't be too pessimistic about the future. In fact, I think there's a lot of opportunity to augment humans and reduce the level of administrative, mundane, activities that we have to do. Clearly, there are risks, right? There are risks in how this is used by bad actors. There are risks in terms of how the profits from AI get distributed and so on. But it feels like we can probably overcome these risks through a combination, potentially regulation, although there's no consensus that regulation should be introduced very quickly. And I think, Tiphaine, you made a great point at the end, which is education is the other way in which we can, I think, mitigate some of the bigger risks. So all that remains is for me to thank all the people that listened in, all the people that submitted questions and completed the polls, and most of all to thank our panelists. So thank you very much. That was a lively discussion. Please, we had some disagreements as well, which doesn't always happen. So thanks very much, and yeah, look forward to the next one.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.